Thank you, everyone. I declare the meeting open at 6:01. On behalf of the City of Vincent, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hello, members of the public gallery. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting tonight and just let you know that we do web stream our council meetings, but we don't include the public question time part, so when you're speaking at the microphone you won't be web streamed, just to let you know. And we'll come back to you in just a moment. We'll just take apologies and members on approved leave of absence. CEO?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, I've not received any apologies and we have no members on approved leave of absence. Oh, sorry, correction. I have just received, Councillor Harley's just notified me that she's going to be running a few minutes late to the meeting.
Thank you. I've also had that notification. Okay, so we'll move to public question time. This is an opportunity for anyone who wishes to speak to come to the microphone. There's no prescribed order, so just as first in, best dressed. And please do state your name, your address and the item which you'll be speaking to. And we do time the 3 minutes. Thank you. To commence the live stream of a council meeting this evening. So for anyone who's watching on the live stream, we welcome you to the meeting tonight, and we've just finished public question time. CEO, do we have any applications for leave?
No, Mayor Cole, I've not received any.
In item 5, receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations, I understand that we have a petition this evening, CEO?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. Council has received a petition from Ms M Blakely of Brisbane Terrace, Perth. I'm happy to read it out for you if you like. The petition, along with 22 signatures from residents of Brisbane Terrace, requests that the City of Vincent reviews the recently introduced parking permits policy number 3.9.3 and asks that Brisbane Terrace be exempt from the new Zone 7 and reverts to residential only parking after 6 p.m. and on weekends. Sure. Through you, Mayor Cole, council members, under clause 2.24 of the standing orders, there are a number of specific motions that council can move when dealing with petitions. On this particular matter, it's worth noting to council that the Director of Community Engagement has been in direct contact with the head petitioner and advised that administration is actually sympathetic to the issues that they've raised and actively exploring options to address their concerns. With that in mind, under clause 2.24 of the standing orders, particularly sub-clause 4, council can resolve that the petition be received, or that the petition be received and a report be prepared, or that the petition be received and be referred to a committee for consideration, or lastly, that the petition be received and be dealt with by the council. My view, council, would be that one or the other of the first two options are probably the best. That is, that the petition be received, or that the petition be received and a report be prepared back to council.
Look, I think that what has been raised through the petition could potentially require an amendment to the existing policy. So my view would be that the most sensible course of action would be to receive the petition and request that a report be prepared. Yes, okay, thank you. Can I have a mover, please?
May I just ask a question in relation to that, receiving the report?
Sorry, can you move it and then ask a question?
Sorry,
that might be best.
I'm happy to move it.
I'll get a second. Councillor Hallett, go ahead with your question.
Sorry, Mayor Cole, my apologies. Just in relation to receiving the report and requesting a report come back to council, is it possible to specify a date in which that report should come back? I think this is a reasonable. This is something that is being highlighted from a number of sources, so I think it's reasonable that we see a report back fairly soon, if not the next month, as soon as possible after.
Thank you, Councillor Gondaszewski. To the Director for Community Engagement, would a 1 month turnaround be a reasonable expectation on this matter?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we've already started working on a solution for this matter, so bringing a report back to the next council meeting is a perfectly reasonable timeframe.
Perhaps we could have support from the mover and seconder to amend the motion to add that the report be prepared and provided to council at the April meeting Is that agreed by both parties? Okay, thank you. I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Okay, we're now moving on to confirmation of minutes for the ordinary meeting of the 6th of February 2018. Do I have a mover for the confirmation of minutes? Councillor Loden. Seconded, Councillor Fotakis. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Announcements by the presiding member. I have a couple of brief announcements tonight. I just wanted to mention Lady Streets Open, which was our current round of closures in the Leederville Town Centre. That current round came to an end on Sunday. 4 weeks of some fantastic offerings and activation in the town centre, which really was supported by our local town team, Leederville Connect, and the local traders. I just want to make a special mention that for the first two weekends we had Fringe in Leederville with its own name, Leederpalooza, and both events that were held there, both Unfair Day and Dancing in the Streets, were nominated for Fringe Awards for the best free community event, and Dancing in the Streets took out that award. So that was a really fantastic achievement to see that for the first ever Fringe Hub in Leederville. I think that was a really great achievement, and both events were really interesting, quirky, fun, had a great involvement from the community. And I just want to give a special thanks to Leederville Connect, because approximately a year ago they came to see myself and the Director of Community Engagement and said, we'd like to bring Fringe to Leederville. We want to capitalise on this huge event that's happening in Perth. And they did it, and they did it really successfully. They've won an award, and now they want to repeat that and grow it for next year. So I think it's just really inspirational to see what our town teams can do when they put their minds to it. So huge kudos to Leederville Connect for that. Also just want to mention that our online alfresco permits went live on the 22nd of February. That was a red tape reduction strategy for the City of Vincent. In 2006 we did make the alfresco permits free, and we're saving businesses about $150,000 per annum. Probably even more into the future, because we hope that more will now take up the alfresco now that it's free. And we have a simple and quick online system that can give approval in minutes. It's only a very quick thing to do. I tried it out myself, a couple of pages, and pretty impressive stuff. So this is, as far as we know, a first in WA, and just like to say a big thank you to our CEO and staff for delivering this in Development Services. Thank you, Director, as well. And it is important because it does add to our vibrancy in our town centres, and I think that there are a number of key factors around activity in our town centres, and there are a number of factors and influences here. So we've seen our town teams doing things like Leederpalooza, we've got the city, we've got emerging technology, and people who are engaging and the community that are sort of getting on board with these events and these activities. So I hope to see a few more great initiatives come through our business advisory group, through our town centre place plans, and also our festival and event sponsorship for next financial year, with submissions closing this week. So we keep working away at it. We have to keep driving initiatives, because we know that vibrant town centres add so much to where we live here in Vincent. That's all from me on the announcements for this evening. I'll now hand over to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I've not received any declarations of interest for items on this agenda.
Thank you, CEO. What we'll now do is we will go to the reports, but we will deal with the reports that were first raised by the public gallery. So the reports that were raised in the public gallery tonight were 9.6, 10.1 and 9.2. So first of all, 9.6 is number 7 Chelmsford Road, Mount Lawley. Sincere apologies, I've just missed a vital step in the process, which is to ask council members if they'd like to bring additional items forward. So sorry, Councillor Hallett, Councillor Castle, Councillor Harley, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Loden.
13.2.
Thank you. Councillor Fotakis, Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. There's a few. I just note also there's a replacement page for 9.4, which was only issued this afternoon, which just includes the landscaping conditions, so I'm happy for that to go through on block, but note that that wasn't circulated until this afternoon. 9.7, 11.2 and 11.3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Topper. Councillor Kondrashevsky. Okay, so what we'll do then is I'll hand back to the CEO to go through all of the items that will be moved en bloc, and we'll deal with that before we get down to business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, as well as members of the gallery and anyone streaming at home, I'll just now read through the items that Council is about to adopt en bloc. That's exactly as per the officer recommendations that are printed in the agenda papers. Excluded from these items are any of the items that have just been raised, as well as absolute majority items. So the following items will now be adopted by Council en bloc as per the officer recommendations. They are item 9.4, 9.5, 10.2, 10.3, 11.1, 11.4, 11.5, 11.6, 11.7, 13.1 and 13.3.
Can I have a mover and a seconder for the en bloc items, please? Move Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Harley. All those in favour? Declare the en bloc items carried rather. So that does cut down a lot of work. We would have been here for hours if we hadn't taken that step. So thank you everyone for that. So now we'll go back to item 9.6, Chelmsford Road, number 7, Mount Lawley. Change of use from 2 group dwellings to single house and eating house with alterations and additions. Can I have a mover for this item, please? Move Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a refusal, obviously. I support the officer recommendation here. I recognise the applicant's efforts in this area and that they have spent a fair bit of time involved in this process, but fundamentally this is not what we're looking for in this area. If we wanted it to be zoned as a commercial zone, we would have looked to change that in TPS2. It is a residential area, and the issue we have here is we can't just keep on creeping down streets away from Beaufort Street. So the intent here is to keep those commercial zones along Beaufort Street and the residential areas as residential areas. There are a number of additional reasons around setbacks and landscaping and parking and so forth, some of which could be addressed by conditions. But the ultimate issue for me is that it's not what we're looking to see in this area.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I think I echo Councillor Loden's comments. I think we're considering the land use and also requests for discretion on variations to setback, parking and landscaping. I note that, yes, this lot is currently zoned residential and that it is not anticipated to change under the LPS2. Whilst this lot is directly adjacent to the town centre and to a mixed-use development, it is across the road, it is across a laneway, and it has a residential dwellings to the rear. And also, despite a couple of attempts, it has always operated as a residential dwelling. Look, I note that the eating house that is proposed is of a small scale, and that the applicant has advised there's no intention to take part in sort of takeaway delivery services, and has been in conversation and through communication with council has been amenable to the idea of implementing noise attenuation measures to minimise impact on surrounding residences. I think in this instance, I think it is probably evident in how the other residents have and the group have maintained, good relations through this process. In that, I believe the applicant to be genuine in the desire to create a local family restaurant, and I'm sort of in some ways wistful for this for Beaufort Street as well, recognising that we've seen change in the street over recent years. But look, just because I can appreciate the offering, and it doesn't mean that it can be part of my frame of decision making. We see our development approvals run with the land use, run with the development, not with the operator, and I think approval in this instance, as Councillor Loden has said, would require a raft of conditions that would probably really render an eating house in some ways unviable. And I think that then circles back to the fact that this is a residential area, and I've come to the view that this development would, if it was to operate as an eating house, it would not be compatible with the setting. and it would likely impact on the residential character of that particular section of Chelmsford Road. And so I'm supportive of the officer recommendation in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillors, any further comment? Okay, look, I would just like to add some of the comments that Councillor Gontaszewski has already stated were things that came to mind in terms of the fact that there are some, there's some real positives here. It was an absolute joy to meet with the applicant and the neighbours, and the respectfulness that they've shown one another. I really do appreciate that you've maintained that through this process. I think that's a really positive thing. I do, like Councillor Gontaszewski, believe that the applicant does have a clear vision for the use of the property. He is a neighbour to it. He sees it as a good opportunity for a family-run business. Obviously, rent won't be an issue like it would be on Beaufort Street, so I understand all of those factors and I understand the sentiment behind it. But I believe that it is important that we do delineate between our town centres and our residential areas, and that the neighbour sentiment is very important here in that they very strongly want to protect that delineation. Not only is it through land use zoning, but I think also the slow point on the street with the one-way traffic is another clear delineation in this area that really shows that you're entering a residential area. As mentioned, there are lots of vacancies on the high street. We'd love to see some activation happening there. And I do understand from an email that was received today from the applicant's representative that bike parking and landscaping could have been something that we potentially got over. But for me, I think that the primary concern is the land use, the fact that this will impact on the neighbours, that the neighbours see it as interfering in their residential quiet enjoyment of the area, that there would be noise issues, and that this is something that I think that as a council we haven't looked at this site as rezoning in town local planning scheme 2, which is imminently to be signed, so it's not something that the council has looked at objectively and said this is actually a good place for a commercial use. We've been very clear about trying to retain and prevent that sort of leakage, as one of the residents talked about, into residential areas. And it is something that we have also defended in the past, where you have residential on the cusp of a commercial area. We do have to draw the line, and while I know that this will be disappointing to the applicant, I think that the officer recommendation is the right way to go in this regard. Any further comments? Can I put the item, all those in favour? All those against? And shall I call that again? All those in favour? You're for? Let's all put our hands in the air. Councillor Fotakis? Unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 10.1, Charles Veryard Reserve, Community Survey Results regarding dog exercise area. Can I have a mover for the dog exercise area matter? Move Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the officer recommendation in this item as well. I note this, we've had a number of conversations with our community about this idea that arose from a community budget submission. From reviewing the survey results and reading and also reading the comments and feedback through the consultation process, I don't see that there's a clear consensus from either from park users that perhaps don't exercise their dogs, but also even the park users that do exercise their dogs, that a fully fenced dedicated dog exercise area is correct in Charles Veryard. I think that we've started, when we've considered this, we've really started from a point of quite a specific idea, and really perhaps what's needed here is we need to consider this idea at a more strategic or abstract level, in that what does a dedicated dog exercise area look like in Vincent? When you go to places like, New York, there's signs on the gate that say no people without dogs, no dogs without people. And I think there's a reason for that sometimes, but what we're looking at here is potentially fencing an area, or considering whether a fenced area would be useful in this particular park. Some dog owners raised the idea that they were concerned about the idea that if an area was fenced, that you would end up with dogs being restricted from other sections of the park. And I think that we need to make sure that when we're having these conversations, we're not necessarily just looking at the specific. I think we're undertaking a public open space strategy, and while I don't necessarily anticipate that specific locations for dog exercise areas would fall out of that, I think that subsequent to that, this maybe is a conversation we need to have. And I would be open to the consideration of, conversation with the community about what that might mean, and really sort of actually having that conversation, and where those, if that was something that the community was in favour of, where it might be appropriate to go. I don't feel that we had the consensus to move ahead in this instance, but as I said, I'd be happy to have that conversation a little bit at a broader level, at a Vincent-wide level down the track. But so in this instance, I'm happy to see some additional landscaping. It will, I think, improve safety for park users in general, whether that's kids kicking a ball or dogs, running around. More plantings, it's good for biodiversity, birds, dogs, people, and all the rest. So I'm happy with what the outcome is in this instance, and perhaps when if we do revisit this again, it's not necessarily a Charles Verriard-centric proposal. It's something we could look at in Vincent more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gondaszewski. Councillor Loden.
Nothing to add.
Councillors, Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question through you to the Director of Engineering. Can we get an idea of what the proposed garden extension would look like in section form? I can see what sort of heights, what sort of density, what sort of gaps between plants, how permeable visually or for dogs or people or otherwise. Is it intended to be a hard barrier of low hedging? Is it intended to just be grass or otherwise? Can we get some idea of what it would look like physically, please?
Perhaps the Director could do a water painting for us to illustrate. It's quite a tough question.
Thank you. So you may. First thing to say is the barrier obviously won't be 100% non-permeable to dogs. I think we had a question and briefing about that. We will do our best to make it a very thick barrier, but inevitably dogs will be able to get through. It will be native planting, and it'll be in the style of what's already there. So it'll be a range of heights from sort of waist height to chest height, is my understanding.
And just further to that, the areas that are marked in the plan as existing garden, where that says additional native plant to be planted to provide densely planted vegetative barrier, again, that's intended to be sort of so that the foliage will grow together, but obviously the roots will provide, there will be still space for people and dogs to get through in a hurry if they need to.
Through you, Mayor. Well, the intention is to thicken up the barrier, so there's no intention to leave gaps for people to walk through. There are already ways around that particular bed, so that is the intention.
Well done, Director. Any further questions or comments? Look, I will just quickly comment because, again, Councillor Gondaszewski has really sort of nailed my sentiments on this item this evening. I just did want to say that at first when I read through the results, I was quite surprised because there was a great response from really what was the target group, which was North Perth residents and a large proportion of dog owners. But then I think there is this real diversity of feelings around how we treat our open space, and that it's not clear cut. And I think that this is why I'm really pleased that we're doing an open space strategy this year, because as our open space becomes more in demand, we really need to unpick this and work through it. So there are definitely different interests and feelings about how our open space should look and feel and operate. And that came through clearly when you read through some of the comments. Such a diversity of comments were involved. So look, I do agree that the results don't demonstrate a clear mandate for council to put in an enclosed dog exercise area. There is obviously a high appreciation of the look and feel of the naturalness of the park and the open space. And I think that the partial natural barrier is a really good compromise in this situation. I think that it will be, that it will be quite a developed barrier. There's $11,000, which is not insubstantial, being spent on the vegetation. But just to add to what Councillor Gondaszewski said, that this is not the last that I think we'll be having this discussion about dog exercise areas, but we really do need to have a more strategic discussion about what they look like, the locations, how big they need to be, what sort of facilities they offer, and what sort of open space they take up. So, as sort of highlighted, the open space strategy is the beginning point, and it will probably eventuate that we might even need to get to a point where we look at having a specific dog exercise area policy. So at this stage, I think that the officer recommendation is the right course of action for this particular location. Any further comments? I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Okay, we're now at item 9.2, which is an absolute majority decision on 148 London Street, North Perth, proposed unlisted use, home business, chiropractor. I have a mover for this item, please. Move Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I support the officer recommendation and I'm happy for it to be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillor Hallett.
I also support the officer's recommendation.
Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. So that concludes the items that were raised by members of the public gallery. So I will just... just seeing if there's any particular items that members of the public gallery are here for. No, I think we'll move on through the agenda sequentially. So item 9.1 is Unit 7 of 117 Brisbane Street, Perth, proposed amendment to condition of previous approval, change of use from office to unlisted use, medical consulting rooms. Sorry, the key factor, non-medical consulting rooms. Do I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Loden, seconded. Councillor Gondaszewski, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Given this is an extension of a previous approval from 12 months ago and that we haven't had any complaints, I'm happy to support the officer recommendation.
Anything further, councillors? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Now moving on to item 9.3, which is number 366A Charles Street, North Perth, change of use from shop to unlisted use, non-medical consulting rooms. It's an absolute majority decision. Councillor Toppelberg moved. Councillor Hallett seconded.
Thank you. So I'll probably make some more comments about the waiving of cash in lieu that was approved under delegated authority when we get to the item in relation to our car parking policy, or the non-residential development parking requirements. And I do note that whilst there was a 6.84 bay shortfall that was approved as of this evening, if the policy gets approved as recommended, that would have required 9 car parking bays, which would still remain, even though they're intending to put in 3, would still remain as a 6 bay shortfall. The likelihood that this property will be, given its zoning and location, will be redeveloped before that becomes a real issue is quite high. Otherwise, I may have had some concerns about extending that cash in lieu free kick. But if we look at on the current value, that's by my calculations, at a 6 bay shortfall of $5,500 in an area that is under pressure for car parking. That's a significant burden that's being placed on the surrounding community to provide that extra car parking. But that being said, there's been no complaints thus far, and the business has been operating and has been operating in good faith on the advice and approval that they received from the City 12 months ago, and I'll support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Hallett?
Nothing to add.
Councillors? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Now moving to item 9.7, which is outcomes of advertising for policy number 7.7.1, non-residential development parking requirements. Can I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's a few late amendments. I do apologise, but they are relatively straightforward. I think that overall, make two comments about the proposed change in policy. One, it's a lot simpler than what we have currently, and the removal of the discounting system, I think, whilst it perhaps moves a little bit away from the sentiment that we have about overtly encouraging other forms of transport and therefore providing discounts for those specific, like proximity to large car parks, train stations, bus stations, bus stops, etc. We've effectively built that into the objectives of the car parking policy, and the table is reflected accordingly. I think what we'll find is, on paper, if you look at some of those discount factors, the requirement for car parking for most developments outside of town centres will actually, in real terms, probably increase slightly from what they are under the previous policy, but that's something that I have no doubt that we will be revisiting this policy numerous times over the next 24 months, and just in line with some of the discussions that we had previously. I noticed today that the largest car maker in the world, which is Volkswagen, have committed, I think, in Australian dollar terms, $54 billion over the next 5 years towards electric and driverless vehicles. So as much as people might think that some of what's out there is futurist talk and that it's maybe coming, maybe not, I think that's a strong indication that the future is on its way. In light of that, I will move it. So I'll go through them sequentially. We'll start with the pink, which is... so I'll move that amendment, which is to...
just before you do that, Councillor Topperberg, I'll just see if the seconder wishes to speak at this point. No? Okay, continue.
Thank you. So the...
and also, I'll just see if we get a seconder for the pink. Councillor Hallett, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's quite possible people, well, if they've read it quickly, they'll know what it is. So effectively, it's just recognising that shift in the objectives, so it's quite self-explanatory. So just because it was late, I will read it. So to support a shift towards more active and sustainable transport modes, so it adds the words that will reduce the dependence on single-person private vehicle trips.
Do you wish to say anyone? Councillor Hallett?
Thanks. Yeah, I support the amendment. I think it pretty much underpins the direction that we're wanting to go broadly in a lot of our strategies, so it's good to flag this again.
Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Back to the substantive.
Yep, so we'll go with the yellow now. So this is just a new recommendation which... I'll move it, so I'll read it. So it requested administration's review of the Delegated Authority Register 2017-18 include a requirement for council to itself determine development applications involving the waiver of cash in lieu of car parking policy provisions.
Can I have a seconder for the yellow? Councillor Harley?
Yeah, so essentially what this says is that whilst it won't put it in the policy, it will change the delegation such that applicants have the ability to have car parking shortfalls approved under delegated authority, but the waiving in cash in lieu is only a decision of council. I think that given the obvious shift in terms of car parking requirements and what is probably currently a mismatch between the way that the world is going and that we're probably at that peak point of pressure, particularly in our town centres, about the either real or perceived need and demand for car parking to make businesses sustainable. And I think that is, as the Charles Street example perhaps highlighted earlier, that's something that should probably come into this forum rather than the actual waiver of the dollars being approved under delegated authority.
Thank you. Councillor Harley, do you wish to speak?
I have nothing to add.
Does anyone wish to speak on the yellow amendment? Councillor Murphy?
I've just got a question. I'm wondering what the actual impact would be on the administration. Maybe through the chair, you able to let me know maybe in the last 12 months how many development applications have been waived under delegated authority?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Speaking earlier to some other council members, I can't recall any applications that where car parking was waived in the last, since I've arrived at the city in the past 18 months. The application that we was on the agenda was actually determined in February 2016, 22nd of February 2016. So that was one example of where car parking, for cash in lieu of car parking, was waived. But I can't think of another one that was determined under delegated authority since I arrived in September, October 2016. So.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously.
Okay, we're moving through them in, I'm guessing, descending order of surety about whether they'll get up. So we'll move to the light purple.
Do you wish to talk us,
Yeah, well,
read it through and then I'll get a seconder?
It's a reinstatement of a previously deleted clause, but with a couple of changes, which effectively retains the doubling of cash in lieu for new developments that are of a larger scale. And I'll talk to that in a moment if I get a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Harley.
So what I'll address, well, it's been a provision of the car parking policy for a number of years.
Sorry, Councillor Toppelberg, the CEO has just requested a point of clarification, so just if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Apologies for interrupting your flow, Councillor Toppelberg. I just wanted to point out that with the proposed amendment, the opening paragraph, which is numbered 1, as well as 1.1, aren't actually required because they were successfully introduced by proposed amendment number 1. So for the purposes of the amendment, what would best appear in the minutes, and then if it were successful to become the substantive motion, is for 1 to disappear altogether, 1.1 to be changed to actually be 1.2, and the rest can flow as it is. And as I said, because the introductory text has already been introduced through successful adoption of Amendment 1, and 1.1 is already taken as being the change to the objective of the policy.
That all makes sense. Do you accept that change, Councillor Toppelberg, as the mover?
Wholeheartedly, thank you.
And the seconder was Councillor Harley. Acceptable? Yes. Okay, thank you.
So what I'll talk to is actually the administration comment, which is they say that it's not supported, and I agree entirely that the rate of cash in lieu should not be related to dollar value of a development. I agree entirely, but it is currently the best measure that we have within the planning framework to denote bigger developments from smaller developments. That's how it's denoted by the department in terms of what they use as thresholds to go to the development assessment panel. And whilst that threshold exists in planning, instead of having something completely subjective like doubling cash in lieu for larger new developments, to me it's quite simple that it's a line that already exists in the planning framework. So for me that's a valid marker. I also agree that car parking and cash in lieu is a crude planning tool in that regard, and whilst that impact doesn't necessarily relate to I agree with the officer's comments that the value of cash in lieu does relate to that car parking infrastructure, but if we were to do that on an honest dollar for dollar basis, we'd probably be sitting somewhere in Subiaco territory at $15,000 to $20,000 a bay. The reality is we set it at a level that we think is appropriate for our community, our uses, and that delicate balance between encouraging reasonable changes of use or reasonable development that is going to benefit an area without either an undue impost on applicants or an inconsistent application of the policy. I think that's the danger is if you set it at a level that's unrealistic, you end up either waiving or playing with it. And relatively speaking, Vincent has been consistent in the application of its cash in lieu. But what this policy or this line in the policy has successfully achieved since it's been there is preventing people. It effectively forces people who are developing at a larger scale to consider their car parking up front and to provide something appropriate for the development. And we also get the real use classes that are intended particularly for the ground floor at the point of application. And to the best of my knowledge, it's been relatively successful, notwithstanding some appointed DAP members having a view on cash in lieu that differs from the cities, but that's a separate matter. Hopefully if this is successful, it will make it clear that it's the clear view of council, and that will actually help to strengthen it as we move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Harley?
I'm not sure how to follow that, but no, I support the amendment as argued.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Any further comments? Look, I do want to add that I strongly support this amendment. I was concerned to see it removed in the report that was put to us. I do think that large-scale developments can have a much greater impost in not providing sufficient car parking because the scale of the developments is so different. So therefore, the scale of the amount of parking that could be paid for through cash in lieu instead of being provided could have quite significant impacts in, for example, town centres, where if you're looking at a car bay here or there where council may be able to provide that in a verge type treatment in a non-built up area compared to a town centre where we've basically made the use of every part of public land where we can get parking bays, and in fact we're trying to kind of move away from that and create more open space. So I'd hate to see a development of a significant nature try to pay out 100 car bays in cash in lieu, because it's quite cost effective to a developer rather than actually building it, and then the city having to deal with the impacts where we're not yet quite at peak parking demand, but hopefully that change will come in time, but we can't make these policy decisions here and now because we're not quite there yet. So I do think that we don't want to make cash in lieu pocket money to multi-million dollar developments, and I was concerned that this potentially could see us go down that path, and I do think it's fair and reasonable for council to scale the cost of cash in lieu for those larger scale developments. So I strongly support this amendment. Any further comments? Councillor Fotakis.
When looking at our plans for town centres, and I agree with the Mayor's comments, I do get concerned with the large scale and the potential to en masse very quickly affect our decisions moving forward. The cash in lieu amount, if we were looking at having to build multi-storey car parks, by no means would even get close to actually being able to pay for those bays. So I think the added consideration for council is, in the event that we're talking about dozens of car bays times multiple developments, it is going to impact quite significantly on our requirements in our large town centres. So for that reason, I'm in full support.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive.
Okay, so last one on the green. So this is the yoga amendment, basically. So effectively, so when I looked at the
before you start off there, I think that we'll just clarify up front that we'll be removing number 1, and 1.1 would become 1.3.
My thoughts exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it seeks to increase the requirement for recreation private to 0.5 from 0.25 bays as a minimum in residential built form areas. So if I get a seconder, I'll talk to it.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harley.
So, and again, I'll talk to the officers or the administration comment, which is about not supporting it. I agree that we have been taking a broader, more holistic view, but when I looked at the table, admittedly in greatest detail late last night, and I do apologise for the lateness of it, and tried to think in my mind where we've had issues that have been pushing us in terms of uses and particularly change of use applications. And again, car parking is not a basis, generally speaking, for making those decisions. But if I look at and again, if we look at where we've had issues, it's the properties themselves may have been commercially zoned, so this may not be a solution necessarily to it. But particularly where you're dealing with gyms, yoga studios, etc., or fitness centres, and particularly those that start early in the morning, you generally speaking don't have all of the transport options available to people, and usually they are single trip, single person trips, whether that's whether it may be done on a bicycle or otherwise, but often buses aren't available. We don't have any crosstown bus services to speak of, and so whilst this deals specifically in the residential built form area, and so I don't think it's going to necessarily solve the problem. For me, at least, it gives us something to point to, and in the event where there was an exception, someone is always free to apply otherwise. But that use class in particular, and had I had more time to consider it, I may have upped it across the board other than town centre, but I do think that 0.25 is particularly low in a residential area. If you take a house, for example, on a largish property, so for example, one of the properties that fronts Vincent Street on 700 odd square metres of land, a lot of those properties that may be able to accommodate a number of car parking bays, you could potentially have, say, a 30-person yoga studio an application for a 30-person yoga studio, that may, whilst that is a residentially zoned property and we may consider the use appropriate or inappropriate, they'd only be required to provide 7 car bays under the current policy, whereas this would change that to 14, which I think is probably more representative of the impact that it would have on the surrounding car parking amenity.
Councillor Harley, do you wish to speak?
I'm completely in agreement with this one. Nothing further to add, Chair.
Any further comments on this amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? I believe that was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. We're back to the substantive.
So I'll just continue speaking for 2 seconds, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just that the, as I made comments before the amendments, that I think that we are generally moving in the right direction. I think we will see a lot of this policy will come under significant review.
Can I just clarify for 1 minute? I'm just clarifying that you're resuming from moving the motion because the seconder hasn't spoken yet.
That is correct.
Yes.
And move the amendments at the time of my choosing during my speak, as is my right, my understanding.
Absolutely got it.
So I am rapidly becoming a believer, and I think that we're going to see massive change in terms of vehicle use, vehicle demand, car parking demand. There was a presentation from somebody a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks back, that the Mayor and I attended, that showed an aerial map of the car parking facilities that are currently available in Leederville Town Centre, and I think that it represents something in the order of 30 to 40% of the land mass in the town centre is actually designated currently as car parking. So if you look at what the future is, both for land uses close to the city and the requirements for car parking, whether that results in gigantic autonomous towers that pick your car up and slide it up there, or otherwise, or we have no vehicles at all and we're all moving around like the Jetsons, who knows? But I think that those changes will emerge, and when we get our, what's our acronym for our transports? When we get Susan's new policy coming through, the SUMP? RUMP, okay. When we do get our urban mobility, whatever it is, plan coming through, which will have a better name by the time it's presented, I think that will lead to a change in this policy. I think that it's a really important conversation we have with community continually, and we need to be a part of that conversation and that breaking of that cycle, of that expectation that you can't have a successful business unless everybody can park out the front for free for as long as they like. We've been quite successful thus far in achieving that, but if we look at the comments that we get from the impacts on business, it still largely relates to, in terms of local government and what we can do to help business, it largely relates to movement, mobility, accessibility, and car parking and transport and access. So, yeah, I'm pleased to see those changes.
And we're only just moving to the seconder now at this point. Well done, Councillor Toppelberg.
I have a few questions that I'd like to ask the Director of Development Services. I'm still working through the decision-making framework for this policy, so I beg your forgiveness if this is somewhat unclear. I just want to confirm that under the current policy for non-residential parking requirements, we've got Table 1 that sets out our varying land uses and our the calculations of parking provision, and we have our calculations that we can do to minimise parking in relation to proximity to public transport, etc. And my understanding is that where an application does not meet the provisions of that table, it may be refused, and then it also goes on to talk about or it may be approved where reciprocal parking arrangements are provided or cash in lieu is provided. Is those the sort of the three only or predominant mechanisms by which delegated authority could be applied for the decision around a shortfall in residential parking under the current non-residential parking, my apologies, under the current policy?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, there are two things that the policy sets out. I think the third is probably 2.4 of the current policy, which says waiving of car parking requirements, which states the city may, at its discretion, waive the car parking requirements including the cash in lieu requirements in the following instances. So that's the third option that's set out in the policy. Now, despite the policy, the city needs to assess any application on its merits, having due regard to the policy. So the policy is not the only thing that the decision maker needs to consider, but they're the three pathways set out in the policy.
Look, I think at this point in time, I'll just turn to the current draft policy. So under the current draft policy, the decision maker exercises judgment to consider the merits in relation to both the objectives of the policy and then also the requirements that are listed in section 1, I believe. And some of these relate again to reciprocal parking or cash in lieu, but again it perhaps provides a little bit more detail around other requirements that may be considered, such as adequate parking and or transport infrastructure is available to service the needs of users, alternative parking are already provided and available and accessible, and alternative transport modes are convenient and adequate to meet demand. I think my question in this regard is, would you consider that this policy perhaps, I'm trying to think of the right words, that the current wording, that there is sufficient direction and sufficient detail within the current requirements that are listed and the objectives to provide for a consistent but perhaps responsive decision making in relation to the assessment of terms like adequate parking, already available and accessible, and alternative transport modes are convenient and adequate to meet demand. I guess from my perspective, I just have some concerns, and this goes to what Councillor Toppelberg was talking about earlier, that this is an issue that I think we need to retain within the public sphere and within public debate and discussion, and our decision making around this should essentially be as transparent as possible. So, and I would be loath to see any this policy step us back from our current positions, but my understanding through my reading of the report and from discussion with the director is that that is not the case, that there is a equitable, that there is no stepping back from the current requirements, or that the new policy meets the current requirements for discretion and delegated authority, and that we will have the opportunity to review the delegated authority register in the coming months.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. I guess there's a couple of things there. The first is that the policy provides a lot more guidance, provides clear guidance now on the full decision-making process that the council, the JDAP or administration, delegated officers will need to have regard to. So the terms adequate and the terms used in Part 1 of that policy, on Clause 1 of the policy, are set out deliberately to allow the decision maker to exercise its discretion when making a decision. The current policy doesn't provide guidance on that, and yet administration's delegated officers have the authority and the delegation from council to make decisions to waive cash in lieu and parking requirements already. So this policy actually, I think, strengthens up council's position on how those decisions would be made. Now, as I mentioned, I can't recall in the last 18 months where the city has waived cash in lieu under delegated authority. The right place for council to make it clear who should be making those decisions is the delegations. We're currently in the middle of reviewing those delegations. We need to have a new set of delegations in place at the same time as the scheme comes in, which is I don't know how long it is until the new scheme's in place, but it is imminent. It will be in the next month or so, I suspect. And so we're looking to have a discussion with council members at the workshop in March regarding the delegations to finalise a change to those and to have that adopted by council as soon as possible. So this issue and providing some certainty and clarity for council members in the community on who will be making decisions about waiving car parking is something that will happen in the immediate future. I hope that provides enough comfort, given that I think that this policy actually strengthens the decision-making process rather than takes any powers or weakens it.
Thank you. Nothing further from me.
Any further questions or comments in relation to the non-residential development parking requirements policy? Okay, look, I just want to comment that I'm really pleased to see the introduction of an ancillary use into the policy, which will require some flexibility for our local businesses if they want to introduce something into their business. For example, if a shop wants to add a cafe element, previously they would then have to change their use to an eating house and all of the cash in lieu and parking that would come with that. So in an effort to try to allow our local businesses to be flexible and to respond to the changing nature of retail, for example, we have introduced an ancillary use, which as long as it remains smaller than the dominant land use, that use can happen without an additional car parking requirement kicking in, which in most cases we would find an existing use wouldn't have the ability to provide additional car parking, and so therefore it becomes a prohibitive cost for businesses to become flexible and responsive in quite hard economic times and changing times. So really pleased to see the introduction of an ancillary use. I think it goes to the sort of things I was talking about at the opening of the meeting around supporting our town centres, reducing red tape, allowing our businesses to flourish and to be responsive. So really happy to see that introduced. Any further comments on the non-residential parking requirements? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. So we've dealt with the engineering items for this evening and we'll be moving to corporate services. Item 11.2, Local Government Act Review, City of Vincent response to the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries discussion paper. Can I have a mover for this item, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
I'll just talk briefly. I guess broadly, I'm a little bit disappointed that this didn't seem like a review of the Act. It seemed more so how can we stop the shenanigans of a particular or some particular local governments and some of the issues that the Act prevented from the state from acting. Some of the things are narrow to the point of almost being person-specific, and I think that that's a lost opportunity. And whilst the Walga response and our proposed response, as well as some of the amendments, seek to broaden some of that, I do think that I would perhaps like to see a bit more thought and perhaps further round of consultation before the Act is changed, because this is probably a once-in-a-generation opportunity in relation to this. And as I say, it has been quite focused on individual council members and roles and responsibilities, but not dealing with any of the positive. More so, how can we get the state the powers to fix the negative? That being said, there is some good stuff in there as well. I'm not going to talk for too long. What I will do is, rather than, and perhaps we should have dealt with item 11.3 first and allowed you to then be able to potentially move these, Madam Mayor. But I know. Perhaps we'll let the seconder speak, and then you can speak to some of these broadly, and then people can move them as they go. That's probably easy. But I'll speak to the amendments when they come up.
I don't really have much to add on the substantive. I'll reserve comments if any have any for each individual amendment.
Does anyone wish to move the amendment either singularly or in their entirety? And just to also flag that there was another addition, the special omnibus 11-part amendment has a part 12, which if I could, am I able to read this out? Yes, so the proposed amendment part 12 is to delete the response to question 10C and replace it with the following. The existing arrangement provides an important control around the appointment and dismissal of senior employees and should be retained. See also response to question 1A. And just to clarify, that's linked to the First Amendment, which seeks to maintain the ability for council to be the decision maker in relation to appointment of senior executives.
Madam Presiding Member, you happy to accept? Oh, we'll do them individually because I think that they may each require discussion or debate. So I'm happy to move the First Amendment.
I'm a seconder for the First Amendment. Seconded, Councillor Loden.
Before I hand over to you, Madam Presiding Member, I think whilst technically it's potentially at odds with the Act, I think we've seen certainly some situations in local government recently where this may be potentially used by a CEO in order to effectively place themselves in front of staff or between council and staff in a manner that is perhaps not conducive to good governance. I think that the spirit of what we have here established here at Vincent is a great respect for the role in terms of the Act, in terms of what the CEO does and their responsibility in terms of recruitment, management, etc. But it does give I suppose if you look at both the level of remuneration, the level of responsibility and the requirement of people in those directors' roles to work with council, it does require the CEO to consider council to the point that they do have a right of veto, and I think that that's in the spirit of how, to me it doesn't disrespect that hard line that exists between the CEO's administration responsibilities and that of the council. So I think it's a good thing that should be taken on board more broadly.
Councillor Loden. Any further comments? Look, I'll just reiterate that Councillor Topperberg has pretty much stated my reason for bringing this amendment forward. I think that the existing system that we have in place works well, and it's carried out respectfully and with, I think, as outlined, the seniority of our senior executive and the remuneration, the close working relationship, for all the reasons already outlined. That is why I'm in favour of the amendment. Any further comments? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, I just agree with that. I think that even sort of the subtext to that is, even though none of us has ever objected to any recommendation by the CEO for senior employment, I think the opportunity for us, the empowerment of the council, like we have that opportunity, gives us ownership, and it does actually, I certainly think that it makes us feel more cohesive. Yes, I think it is important, yeah. Thanks for bringing it up.
Thanks, Councillor Murphy. Any further comments on the amendment? I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously.
All right, I'll go again if you want. That makes it quicker. I'm happy to move Amendment 2.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Topperberg?
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult one because it does require an investment of time that hasn't previously been required, but I think I personally have seen enough of local government and people who could do with training that I don't have an issue with it being a mandatory requirement. I know that there were areas that I felt that I needed training and either sought that information internally or through some of the external opportunities available. I think given the responsibilities and whilst it's still listed as a meeting fee, given the remuneration that is offered to elected members, I think there's an absolute responsibility to have a base level of competency, and the only way that can be ensured is through mandatory training.
Councillor Harley?
Thank you. I support the concept of mandatory training too in some targeted ways. The time frame of 6 months I think may be difficult for some councils, and in particular for regional councils, and by sheer stroke of luck apparently I'm now state councillor for Welga due to the demise of one of the state councillors. So this is going to be a hot topic at Welga as well, because many of the smaller regional councils have got a significant cost impost because of where the training is held, which is primarily down in the city. So it's good to see that an alternative trainer can come into the mix here. The other aspect to this is that many councillors across the state don't have the ability to take time away from work on a scheduled basis, which I know has been an obstacle for many people in being able to attend the WELGA training, because the flexibility for Saturdays isn't there either, or for modules of an evening. The only thing I think that is missing, while I don't think we need to be specific, I think that there needs to be an understanding, is that there are more and more councillors now doing the company directors course. In fact, there was discussion about whether that should be mandatory, and that's $10,000 per councillor. But I do think that councils are moving into very complex waters with the responsibilities on us, and the truth is that the company directors course is actually one of those ones that puts you squarely in the mindset of what you are, and that you're not just a politician, you are assisting in the good governance of a significant business under significant legislative requirements and codes of conduct, etc. So at some point this sector may need to bite the bullet, or WELGA may need to step forward into that space and provide some type of subsidy or renegotiate some type of company directors course. So I support this. I just would like to stay flexible on the idea of it being 6 months, particularly for regional councils, and I'd like to see it being very specifically targeted around budgeting, CEO performance, code of conduct, standing orders, and those matters all to do with our integrated planning framework.
Can I just ask a question, if I may? Potentially of you as the author. That's probably the right terminology. So point 3.4, which talks about the training, who the training provider is, whilst it doesn't preclude online or other modes of training delivery, would you think that it would be in the spirit of the amendment to perhaps include those words specifically, that we encourage other modes of delivery other than face-to-face?
Where would you like to?
I know we can't amend an amendment, so I'm just asking, given that you were the original author.
If you want to move a further amendment, I have no objection to that.
Okay.
And also just to clarify that this has been taken from the Raising the Bar discussion paper, just for consistency, but I would have no problem with a further amendment coming forward.
I'll deal with that after then, thanks.
Any further comment in relation to this one? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of Amendment 2? And declare it carried. Thank you.
So Amendment 2.1, if I may, which would be to insert, so after the word department and before the word and, to insert another dot point in there that would say the city actively encourages the use of... Sorry, am I too quick? So do we know where we are? Okay, so the city actively encourages the use of contemporary delivery methods for this training, including online and other non-face-to-face means.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Harley, thank you. Do you wish to speak?
Yeah, I know that
to
obviously the old guard, shall we say, may be scared of it, but this is quite simple. You can deliver the same speech, workshop, whatever you want, and have a list of questions after that is filled out online that proves the person's actually watched it or participated in it. It doesn't need to be anything that's overly technical, but I think that that's a base. It saves a hell of a lot of money, and it's something that can then easily be rolled out within that 6-month period. So I think that would be good help to our friends at WELGA and the department, that doesn't have to be a massive cost impost.
Councillor Harley?
Fully supportive, and lots of learning statistics will say that actually online learning has a much higher retention rate, so you actually just remember it much better than sitting in at WELGA for the day or any other training provider face-to-face. So.
Any further comments in relation to this amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to move? We've got to speed it up. There's quite a few to get through here. Yeah, thank you. Seconded, Councillor. Are you seconding? No, I think there was a typo in that last one. controversial. It's a typo.
It's a controversy.
Just a repeat of the word used.
Through you, Mayor Cole, whilst every effort is made to follow the amendments that are put up, just for convenience on the screen, we do always revert back to the recording for the purpose of confirming the minutes.
Yes, that is correct. Emma does spend a lot of time on the earphones following days. Thank you, Emma. You're doing a great job on the run. Okay, so where were we? We're looking for a seconder for the move. Councillor Harley, seconded. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Loden, for seconding. I fully support this amendment. This is long overdue for the sector, particularly over a number of years, over a number of issues and a number of inquiries, and there are other councils who have been really asking for this. There is a double-edged sword in setting a minimum standard, and that is you actually lower the bar because it's incredibly hard to get agreement, but that is the role of WELGA to try and negotiate that. It certainly occurs in the public sector. They have set a public sector code of ethics. It is very clear. It is very simple. And then they set 6 mandatory, maybe there's a 7th one now, I've lost track. There's 6 mandatory areas that everyone's code, regardless of what government department you are, you must address. And within those 6, they also have key dot points, which is a legislative framework. I just don't think it's that hard for the sector to do. While we are all individual municipalities, so is the state public sector in terms of all being individual authorities, legal entities, and that it occurs through legislation, and I believe that could just as easily occur through the Local Government Act. And I think the model's already there. I don't think that the local government sector needs to look very far at all. They could look on the Public Sector Commission website and they could download this material virtually free of charge. They'd probably be allowed to use the intellectual property if they asked really nicely. So I'm very supportive of this, and I think this is something that we should really push quite hard. Both Councillor Castle and I are on the WELGA zone as representatives, so I think it is something that we as a council should be pushing quite hard for in any forums, including, dare I say, CEO forums that you may attend, CEO, where you get an opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Nothing to add. Anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Councillor Fotakis.
I just want to add that I'm absolutely 100% in support of this amendment, having come from an industry where we've had a code of conduct for many years, and strengthening that as well as linking that with mandatory training has raised the bar in that industry. I still think there's a lot of work still yet to be done in improving the culture. A lot of industries, ours included, in governance, but I think this is a step forward.
Thank you. Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour, declare it carried. Thank you.
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Have a seconder, Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. This is also an amendment that I'm pleased to see come forward, and I know that it was in our Raising the Bar document. And just to unpack this a little bit so people understand, I'm sure you all do already, the role of the Public Sector Commission. They have a different role because of they have legislative oversight, given that the Commissioner has that responsibility. So I think this amendment is a good middle ground. We're not asking for all CEOs in local government to suddenly come under that model, but the Public Sector Commission has a very specific role, and that they can assist, and they do have some responsibilities to assist the local government sector already in several key areas and under legislation. And there doesn't seem to me to be a clear body, an integrity body, or a central agency that can assist the local government sector. WELGA don't do it in that way. The Department of Local Government obviously have their own role, and for me there seems to be a void, and I do believe that local governments should be able to get assistance from the Public Sector Commission. I believe that could be of assistance to the CEOs, but I believe they could genuinely assist councils as well. And thinking about, for those of us who've been around and had recent experience in bringing a new CEO on board, it is complex. And you need advice, and contractual matters can sometimes, involve consultants and can involve lawyers as well. So, and we're a relatively, I like to think, sophisticated council, but there are many councils as well around the state who do not have that level of resource available to them. So I think the Public Sector Commission has a key role here through invitation, and I'd like to see us support this strongly as well.
Councillor Loden, any councillors wish to speak? Councillor Toppelberg.
I support the amendment because of what it undoes. I also understand the role of the Public Sector Commission, but I think it's probably a sad commentary broadly on local government that elected members entrusted with the responsibility of recruiting somebody to be the CEO of an organisation of the size and nature that local government is, have demonstrated to the point that this is even a consideration, that there is across the sector perhaps a need for it. I think that it's a fundamental right and fundamental responsibility, and if you're not capable of going through the process of recruiting the only employee that you recruit to effectively take charge of your decision making, then perhaps you have to question the capability of the local government itself. So to me, at the point where you'd feel it necessary to do so, a well-resourced and appropriate recruitment consultant should be able to provide a capable body of people with all the information required. So I think it's a rather sad commentary on the sector that it's even necessary, but I support the amendment because it peels back what those potential powers would be.
Any further comments? Look, I'd just like to say that our draft response didn't basically invite the Public Sector Commission to play a role in CEO recruitment and appointments, but I believe that the sort of language around what role could the Public Sector Commission play, what level of involvement, that is a concern for me, that you could actually see a third party, an unelected third party, seek to intervene potentially in a recruitment process, which is one of the fundamentally important things that a council does, is to make that appointment. It is necessary not only because you're democratically elected to do so, and that's the whole basis of government, in that you have the elected representatives who then appoint a CEO who runs an administration, but also that that could be that right and responsibility could be fettered by a third party who is not elected by the community to do so. So that did raise some potential concern for me, not that that is absolutely being mooted in the discussion paper, but that I think that we need to just really clearly state that we would love to have your advice and support. It's an amazing resource, the Public Sector Commission. As Councillor Harley has said, it's not something that we have an equivalent of in local government, and we should call upon them when needed, but to take that to some kind of interventionist role is something completely and entirely different. So just thought that our submission should state that very clearly up front, that is absolutely not supported. Thank you. Any further comments? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Amendment 5, anyone? Councillor Toppelberg. Seconded. Councillor Hallett.
I'm happy with the shift to, I think we have no position on this issue, but it probably goes back to my original comment on the substantive, and that is that this seemed to be more a pointed exercise in assigning powers rather than a broad review of, or some pointed questions, I suppose, about the powers of the state in dealing with issues of perceived either rogue or dysfunctional local government, rather than actually fulfilling a positive role. So I'm comfortable with the wording that's been suggested there. I don't know where this will land, but I think that it's fairly clear, certainly given recent events as well, that the state is super keen to have powers to make spot decisions of this nature. But some of the questions we ask about the nature of that appointment, etc., hopefully will be answered as this consultation process continues.
Councillor Hallett, any further comments? But just to clarify that this is is in a similar vein to the previous amendment, in that this is about remedial intervention and having an external third party involve themselves. And again, it's just that principle of that being to support and advise, and not to seek to have some quasi decision-making role in an established government situation with elected members and a CEO appointed to direct the administration. So again, just raising some issues around that and trying to highlight that is an extremely strange proposition if it does go down that path. Any further comments? Can I put it, all those in favour? Declare it carried. Councillor Toppelberg. You're moving Amendment 6, quite a simple one.
That's the one, yep.
Yep. Do I have a seconder for this item? Councillor Loden.
Agree. I would take it as a given, but glad to have it there in writing.
Any further comment? Okay, just to explain, this is really about where we're saying we're happy to have the employment of a state public employee and their benefits come across to local government, that they bring their money with them, so that local government doesn't then get 6 month leave loading without the cash equivalent to pay for it. So quite simple administrative matter. Councillor, you wish to speak?
Yeah, I'll support it. I have some concerns about the impact that may then have if... I personally think there should be limits on how much leave is brought across. The leave liabilities, in this case, it would be from the state public sector, can be significant. There's a big problem in the public sector with leave liabilities. So I would be very concerned if somebody commencing here brought more than 1 year's entitlement over, because any more than that means they've accrued that leave, which means they haven't taken leave in at least one or more of those years. And the non-taking of leave increases your risk in terms of health and safety, stress, a whole range of things. So I do have some concerns about this being unlimited. I have some concerns about what that means for us as a small organisation if somebody was to bring across leave more than a current 1 year's entitlement in the case of annual leave, and what that means if at some point, when they are entitled to under the minimum conditions of employment, give us 2 weeks' notice and clear out all the leave that they've brought over 8, 12, 16, 20 weeks. So I've got some concerns about how we would manage that. The only other part of this, I guess, is to do with the personal leave. So I'm seeking clarification about this, whether this would apply to personal leave / sick leave. If anyone's able to answer that.
Well, I've already spoken, so I might see if the CEO wishes to provide any commentary on this.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it would depend on what the prevailing conditions of the relevant award are. That's really what it would have to depend on, because, for example, under local government award, enterprise agreements, etc., there is no transferability of personal leave. It's only... So annual leave, if you leave from one local government to go to another local government, the only thing that you carry across is your long service leave, and that's it. Your annual leave is paid out on termination, and you start afresh in accruing leave when you get to your new employer. I'm not familiar enough to understand how it works in the public sector sense to know what the accrual entitlements or the transferability of personal leave is. Although, as the Mayor's previously stated, my view is that the principle that's espoused here in the suggested response is quite sound, because the only proviso that I would need to be concerned with as an employer is to ensure that if the person is coming from the public sector and that they have a significant amount of accrued leave that's coming with them, that there is a corresponding transfer or payment to basically support that leave, as is currently the case when a local government employee moves from one local government to another. The long service leave is paid for and transferred to the new employer.
Thank you. On that basis, I'm actually not going to support this amendment, sorry, having moved it, but unless there can be more detail around this and what those liabilities may look like for us as a city, I'm not comfortable with having essentially the provision of entitlements being brought over without some caps on that. I see there is risk to the city in that, as I've outlined, in terms of people bringing over accrued leave. It is not a good thing that people haven't taken their previous year's leave for whatever reason. I understand under the Long Service Leave Act there are legal obligations on us in regards to that, but I won't be supporting it unless there's more detail or unless we can advocate for things which I believe are more reasonable, such as current year's entitlement versus many years back. It's too open-ended for me.
Can I
Just to give some clarification, I'm not speaking again, I'm just clarifying that currently the draft that we're dealing with tonight states the city has no issues with carrying over the recognition of service and leave between state and local government, full stop. So the amendment seeks to add some further clarity around that. So this, in terms of the clarity that you seek, this does provide some more. So it may be that you might wish to move a further amendment if you're seeking further clarity around some limitations around that.
If I can move an amendment on an amendment, I don't think the original or the amendment actually are very good in either form. So I'm happy to move an amendment. It's a bit. My apologies for doing this.
Well, perhaps if we just deal with this amendment first, and then if you wish to move a further amendment, we'll
sure.
Then deal with it. So is there any further discussion on the amendment before you right now? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Harley voting against. We're back to the substantive. Councillor Harley, do you wish to move an amendment, or would you like us to come back to this and potentially move?
My amendment would be subject to any leave entitlements that are transferred over, being the current year's entitlement due to the employee. And I think if that would be my amendment, if there's a seconder.
Seconder. Councillor Loden, would you like to
just for clarity, would it be being limited to the current year's rather than... Because the current year's entitlement may include or be perceived to be all of their included entitlements up until that point, so limited to the current... It's
just industrial language. It just means this current entitlement versus accrued. It's just the current versus accrued. So I'm happy for whatever words that make it more, I guess, accessible for people and easier to understand, to remove that ambiguity.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think if I understand it correctly, then Councillor Harley would propose perhaps it could be achieved by adding the following words to the end of what was just adopted, and that's subject also to any transferred entitlements being limited only to current entitlements. Is that?
Current entitlements. Now, the Leave Service Leave Act has its own wording, so I wouldn't try and replicate that in here, because that's got its own legal framework about how much you're allowed to be transferring over. So if you keep with the words current entitlement, you're keeping it simple for the long service leave, and you're using the correct language for annual leave, because you're not... We can come back to it.
Can I just ask a question? When I'm thinking of current entitlement, for me that would be whatever your accrued entitlement would be. So that could include, say, 6 months long service leave plus whatever. I mean, would it be better off? My question is, would it be better off to put a cap on the amount of months of leave that could be carried over, for example? Should we come back to it potentially?
We shall, because the words current entitlement have a very specific meaning. That is, they are your current entitlement. But to remove ambiguity, you may wish to have some other wording in there that limits it. So for annual leave, you would limit it to 1 year's, the current year's entitlement. For long service leave, it's covered by the Long Service Leave Act, so I wouldn't change any words regarding long
just
service.
Just a further question then. So if someone had accrued, say, 6 months of long service leave, but then their current year of entitlement was just the 4 weeks leave, would you be comfortable with them bringing across all of their long service leave, which would be substantial, plus just the 4 weeks annual leave?
To answer that question, the Long Service Leave Act already covers what you can bring over, so that's legislation, so there's not much getting around that. If the Long Service Leave Act applies, it applies, and that wording in there is very specific, and that relates to your entitlement plus any entitlements to pro rata that you may have accumulated post your first allocation.
Sorry, just for clarity, and I'm not sure who'd be able to give the response, but my understanding is that the whole point is the Long Service Leave Act deals with within the current employer, not between sectors. And so if you're moving from the state government as your employer to the local government as your employer, you don't bring your long service leave with you. The requirement, as per the amendment we just made, would be for the state government to pay you out your entitlement, because effectively what we've just said is, so that the wording that has just been amended says that it is from one sector to the other, provided that any leave entitlements carried over from one sector are paid for and honoured by the employee's past employer. So just for clarity through you perhaps to the CEO, does that mean at the point at which they're taken or prior to coming? So if someone comes with 6 months long service leave accrued from the state government into a local government role, would you, as the amended submission currently stands, would you deem that to mean that that employee has to be paid out by the state before they begin here, or that at the point at which they wish to take their long service leave, that is required to be paid by the state government, not the local government?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it's just worth noting that the proposition in the department's consultation paper is that it would work both ways. So it's not just about state government employees coming into local government, it could be local government employees going into state government. And I think regardless of in which direction that movement is, as an employer, it's completely acceptable, and it happens almost on a monthly basis or whenever we get a new staff member, that if there is that relationship in place, then they join us, we provide notification to their past employer, they issue us with a payment that pays their component of the accrued long service leave. As I said, there's no transferability of the annual leave or the personal leave in local government. I'm not familiar enough with how it works in state government, but I would have no issue personally if we made the decision to appoint a new employee and they happen to be the best person for the job, they happen to come from the public sector, and they also happen to have 6 months worth of long service leave entitlement coming across with them. That wouldn't bother me in the slightest as an employer, for the simple reason that for the cost basis alone, let alone the resourcing, but from a cost basis alone, I would expect that through this revised wording, what comes across with them is a corresponding payment from their state government employer that pays their outgoing salary for the position that they were in at the time that they accrued those entitlements.
How would you like to proceed, Councillor Harley? Would you like me to call for a seconder to your amendment?
I personally think we need more detail around this and to go back and have a look at this, because there's been some issues raised during the debate which I think are of concern in regards to the exposure of the city to significant amounts of leave coming across, and in 18 months' time after a pay rise there are costs. I'm in a quandary, and I'm happy to take your direction. I'm happy with the way it is. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge. As amended, there's a lot more debate.
We're at the substantive now, so just so that you're aware. Please do continue, but just so you know that we are at a substantive. We're not actually debating any amendment at the moment, so but we can come back to it.
Yeah.
We'll continue through, have some thinking time.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to that.
Can I ask a question, Madam Presiding Member? Unrelated to leave entitlement, you'll be pleased to know.
Sure.
On page 308 of the agenda, so it's item 4A of our response, so it talks about amending the Local Government Act to require all councils to advertise the position of CEO following the completion of 3 consecutive 5-year terms by the same employee. Can I just ask through you to the CEO, whilst it's currently accepted practice, that 2 questions. One, in your view, do you think 15 years is the appropriate time at which that be compulsory? And 2, is it your understanding that all CEOs are employed on a 5-year contract? And the third part of the question is, where a CEO's contract is renewed, even though it may have initially been 5 years, where it's renewed prior to that, so after year 3, for example, what would be the impact? I asked the question because I had thought that 10 years would probably be a better flat cap than the way in which it's written, but I'll get your response.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in essence, yes, I completely agree that 10 years is ample time, in my opinion. That's my error for not having recognised that. Ideally, I would have preferred for the draft admin response there to read no more than 2 consecutive 5 years, or in total 10 years, whichever is the case. Sorry, the Mayor's just indicated that may have been derived from the Raising the Bar discussion paper, if that did say 3 consecutive 5-year terms. I've got that with me, but it'll take some time to find it. In terms of what contract arrangements other CEOs are appointed on, I can't really provide any universal confirmation of that, but what I do know is from the CEOs that I know, they are all appointed on 5-year performance-based contracts, and I agree that that if the issue is that there might be a way to evade that provision if the contract were renewed or extended before it fell due. I think the intent underlying it was that after a period of time, regardless of how many contract renewals a CEO has been there for, that it would be healthy at the very least to advertise the position in the open market. Doesn't mean to say that the incumbent wouldn't consequently be appointed by the council as the best person for the job if that's what the council felt. But my view is that, yes, after 10 years of service in the position of CEO, that it would be completely appropriate to at least mandate the requirement to go to market, because I think at the very least it provides the council with the opportunity to seek some churn through the whole of the sector.
So, to that end, Madam Mayor, can I move an amendment?
Just to further answer your question, it has been taken directly from the Raising the Bar discussion paper and recommendations, which stated that the Local Government Act is amended to require that all councils advertise the position of CEO following the completion of 3 consecutive 5-year terms by the same employee.
Yeah, that's fine. I understand that. I think that I'll seek to move an amendment, which is to amend our response to 4A to following the words, the completion of 10 consecutive years by the same of 10 consecutive years of employment by the same employee. So delete those other words.
Seconder for the amendment. Seconded, Councillor Loden.
Just a quick comment. The Raising the Bar paper was continually progressing. I think that it was appropriate at the time, and it was written in this chamber on the back of 19 and a half years of one person being in the role, and I think that if you look more broadly and you look at contemporary views, I don't think you find many organisations where a CEO, given the level of responsibility, is even expected to be there for that long, both for their professional development and for the progression of the organisation. In extraordinary circumstances where that's deemed appropriate, they may well be offered further contract, but I think by removing the reference to contracts as well and just making it a flat 10 years, it forces people to at least go to market.
Councillor Loden. Look, I support the amendment too. Raising the Bar was an endorsed position of council, but I think that you're right, that as we go and progress and have this discussion within the sector, we do need to continually challenge the status quo, and I think that 10 years is a good time to test the market, so I'm supporting the amendment. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. If we're going back to the list of amendments before us, we have arrived at proposed amendment number 7. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Castle.
I'm not going to rehash the debate that we had when this was discussed at the workshop, because it was quite extensive. I do think that there are numerous examples, whilst the removing of the provision for private gifts does provide some comfort, I do think there are numerous examples where, for me, I think that probably relates more so to the definition of gift and fulfilling their role as elected member, and obviously, certain circumstances where the mayor and partner invited to attend an event in their role as mayor and to speak as mayor, but because of the value of the tickets, and especially where the value of those tickets potentially going even to charitable causes, I think it's absurd that by virtue of that, the Local Government Act, that person is denied that role, and what $300 meant 30 years ago is different to what it means these days. But I do understand also that if you do increase it, then it does create some murky waters, and you get some rather nice bottles of wine for $400, $500, $600, $700 that can slip under the radar. So I think that it probably goes more to the definition of gift and the fulfilling of a person's role. So I'm supportive of the principle, but think that following the absurdity of the initial changes in relation to gifts and the definitions that came out, there has been some progress, but this one is going to need more debate to sit right with me.
Councillor Castle.
Yes, I support this amendment. I just clarifying that our position is basically to keep the status quo, as this is the current levels. I would also note that despite Councillor Harley's and my vigorous objections at the Walga Zone meeting, at State Council they adopted Walga's position of a $500 threshold. I would also, I've also got a question in terms of the last part of the first paragraph. The option could be provided for councils to adopt their own threshold for prohibited gifts. I'm assuming what we're suggesting there is that we could reduce the level of prohibited gift, and I wonder if that's worth clarifying. For example, that could mean we here could say that our level for prohibited gift is $200. Is that what you're intending with that particular line?
Well, if that's accepted as a $300 prohibited gift, then yes, you would be able to amend that. Yes.
Okay. So I support it as it is. I think there was a range of views, and it's quite tricky to land on a number that will suit everybody. But I think it's quite important for us to have a strong position in this, even though I'm not confident where it lands will be at this level, but we'll at least be on record as saying that.
Any further comments on gifts? Yep.
Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies, I don't mean to labour the debate, but I think off the back of Councillor Castle's comment, it's perhaps also just worth noting that the reverse of that might be true, so that if the regulations or the Act were adopted in the way that's prescribed here, to say a $50 disclosure threshold and a $300 prohibited gift threshold, then some other local governments, certainly taking from the conversation at the Walga Zone meeting, might think it appropriate to impose a higher prohibited gift level. So perhaps that can then be constructed in a way in the legislation to read as, unless otherwise stated in a policy adopted by council through, after public consultation, that's the default prohibited gift limit. So it could actually introduce a bit of flexibility for different local governments, depending on their personal circumstances, to at least publicly disclose and advertise and invite community feedback on what they are proposing if it's going to be different to that default position. So I think that's part of the other advantage of at least offering that option there.
Any further comments, Councillor Hallett?
Just a comment in support, and just to note the second part of that amendment around adding some examples to the comment about prohibited categories of gift givers, and just I would have hoped that gifts from developers an obvious prohibition across the board in all councils, but certainly there are other categories of gift givers that we might want to think about in the future. So it would be important to have that within the legislation.
Just in response to that, Councillor Hallett, developers is already included in the response, so this was in addition to developers, so they're definitely already in the draft response.
Through you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harley?
Sorry, through you, Chair. Just a question in regards to the definition of gifts being received in a personal capacity. So it's dealt with in the discussion paper, and it's been quite contentious as it's dawned on people in this new era of transparency that even wedding gifts and birthday gifts can be included. And my understanding is the original drafters probably never by any means intended for people receiving a wedding gift, for example, to have to declare that, unless, of course, it's from a developer or somebody that they have a direct conflict of interest. But then conflict of interest provisions actually could have dealt with that. So I think that's really an important area for. It's not in here, and I don't know if it lends itself well to this particular amendment. But for us to be mindful of that, there is, for many years, been no discussion whatsoever about personal gifts. And now when they've started unpicking the legislation, it would appear that everything is a gift from anyone apart from your immediate family. And I think that starts straying into, I won't go so far as to say an invasion of privacy, but I do think it goes beyond what the original legislative drafters would have intended, and puts us into the unique situation of being in a sector unlike any other sector. So state parliamentarians, federal parliamentarians are not required to make those same types of declarations. So if we stay mindful of that throughout this, hopefully we'll see some changes to that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, the Mayor's just pointed out that in relation to the personal gifts, that's in response to question 7B. Having been a member of the gifts working group when it was established at the time, there was quite a lot of work done around defining the type of words that could be included into the regulations or the Act to specifically exclude gifts of a personal nature, because, as you've rightly pointed out, Councillor Harley, it is completely peculiar to local government in Western Australia, and it's utterly nonsensical. And by the department's own admission at the time, that was well outside what was considered to be the original intent of the drafters of the legislation.
Any further comments on gifts, Councillor Vatakis?
It's a question just in terms of clarification through you, Mayor Cole, on lobbyists. How are we going to define that? I mean, what are the thoughts on that in terms of who is classified as a lobbyist? Is this the point to actually give consideration to that, or something left for another day?
It's a good question, and when the CEO and I discussed this amendment today, I did raise that question, because this is something which is defined at state government level. It's there is a code of conduct around liaison with lobbyists and contact with lobbyists, and if local government were to go down the path of including lobbyists, then they would then need to back that up with a policy and a definition of what it is to be a lobbyist. So yes, that's a good question to ask. So it's just at this point that definition is not there. Any further comments or questions on the amendment? We'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. There is a proposed Amendment 8 on the table. Councillor Toppelberg.
Seconded.
Seconded, Councillor Harley.
Yeah, look, I think to quote the conversation I had with the Mayor this morning, it's far more Vincent-y than what was originally proposed in our response on that item. To me, it's all clear-cut, and the important one is, for me, is about the requirement for streaming meetings. I think that as technology changes, whilst we had lots of discussion about it here and there was some fear about it or otherwise, I just think that it is the nature of local government, the timing of meetings, the information that's discussed the boring and excruciating trawling through what we do in between. And imagine sitting here listening to this discussion, waiting for something else to happen. We'd probably have to. I enjoy it, and you might enjoy it, but I accept the fact that we've probably put a few people to sleep as well in the last hour and a half. But the point being that I think that it's just to me, it's actually a basic service that we can be expected to provide at minimal cost to our ratepayers and residents, that if they wish to engage with council in that way and to view the decision making, and particularly something that's of interest to them, that we don't force them to leave their home in order to come and do so. And I hope we're not too far away from even looking at Q&A style options for people to participate from home in terms of asking their questions, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. That would require a whole rewrite of the meeting procedures. Who was seconding that item? Councillor Harley.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'm really pleased to see this amendment. I think that in 5, maybe 10 years' time, I'll be optimistic and say 5 years' time, everyone in the sector is going to wonder what the heck we were even debating. Many other councils, obviously in the eastern states, which is where a lot of our learnings came from, have been doing this for many years, and there's a lot to learn from some of the mistakes that were made. But essentially, what this amendment does, I think, is make this the norm rather than what we needed to do, which was to push the envelope. In some cases, have people turn their backs on us at meetings which the Mayor and the CEO and I attended, and other forms of comments that I won't put on the public record. It was tough going, pushing the sector, and there is no doubt that we did do that pushing. And even though the City of Bayswater pips us at the post on some things, we can claim this one as our own. So I think seeing portals, governance portals across the sector, I think is going to be a fantastic thing. Once people drop their fears, I think that WELGA have a role in this as well, again, to step forward, to even create some of the electronic documents that we may need, whether it's gift reporting or portals or whatever. I think there will come a time where people will be able to go onto a portal and compare councils like in a full matrix, like we can do with schools all around the state and the country. So brave new world, but and I think the City of Vincent councillors and officers and our community as well should be really proud of any advancements we make in the sector on this particular raft of changes.
Further comments? Councillor Fotakis.
I'm glad to see this amendment come through to be put to us tonight. Have to agree with Councillor Toppelberg. It is 100% Vincent-y. If we want to use that term, another new word. One of the big reasons that I put my hand up to stand for office for the City of Vincent was because of the high standards of this council. It's supported by our community, it's valued by our community, and I recognise the fight that has been had by previous councillors and a lot of our current councillors in achieving the standards that we have now. I love the little tussle that we have with like-minded councils, and you mentioned the City of Bayswater. And I love the fact that we strive to have excellence and innovation within our policies, and this is just one of those. One of the points that comes up quite common when we talk about transparency and accountability, but little is often mentioned about accessibility, and with an ageing population and a population that works inconvenient hours to when we meet, single parents with children at home, there are all the considerations for us to make sure that if we're going to be truly inclusive, we do think about including everybody, and that's people that are at home. So not that I've seen anyone in the gallery get put to sleep, but maybe they have the pleasure of putting people to sleep or the like. But no, 100% in support of this. I do like Councillor Harley's idea for a matrix of comparison. So maybe there's an idea there, and to have a choosy of councils type service. Yeah.
Well said, Councillor Fotakis.
Excuse me, Chair. I have a question.
Yes.
May I formally put on the record totes Vince?
Sure. We'll speak to our marketing team about making it go viral. Okay, so are there any further comments on proposed amendment number 8? Okay, I'm putting it. All those in favour, declare it carried. And I know that you think you've hit the end of the road, but there was that last amendment that was missed off, and this is really just to tidy up. Emma, do you have that amendment, the final proposed amendment?
Mayor Cole, may I be excused from the chamber for 2 minutes while we...
Sure.
Thank you.
No one's ever asked for permission. Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Just to read out this proposed amendment, it says delete the response to question 10C and replace... And so I'll just read you what 10C says, just to sort of, for absolute clarity. 10C currently says the City believes the CEO should be responsible for the employment, management and dismissal of all other City employees. So this would replace that text with the wording, the existing arrangement provides an important control around appointment and dismissal of senior employees and should be retained. See also response to question 1A. So it's really just going back and tidying up that initial amendment in response to 1A. So that is I'll leave it up to you. Councillor Toppelberg, do you wish to move the amendment?
I'll move that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hallett. Any commentary, questions, debate?
Anything that removes the potential megalomaniac powers of the CEO is a good move in my book.
It's on the record now. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried by all. Thank you. So back to the substantive. So anyone who hasn't spoken to the substantive already, do you wish to provide any comment or ask any further questions? Okay. I do just want to say that we have had a reputation for leading reform in the sector, and that we need to continue to drive that change and to, question where we've come from and where we're going. And if we feel that we're comfortable with gifts being, declarable at $50 and $300, then I think we should push the whole sector to come along with us. If we feel that we should have minimum standards, I think it's not just about what we think we should be doing. We should be trying to push that across the sector, and this is an opportunity for us to voice that and to keep that momentum going. So thank you for your support with moving those amendments tonight. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 11.8, which is the mid-year review of the annual budget. And apologies, that's right. It was added to the, was missed off the agenda originally. 11.3, adoption of standing orders amendment local law, absolute majority decision. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Loden.
Thank you. It's been discussed long enough, but just a question to the CEO, and it's mostly because I only picked it up today and then haven't found the answer to it. So currently on page 350 of the agenda, it's clause 2.21, presentation of committee reports. It states that every committee is to cause a report with recommendations and suitable preamble, etc. And it also says that it is to be presented to the council by the presiding member of each committee. So currently we have an audit committee, which we don't follow this existing provision in our standing orders or proposed future provision in our meeting procedures. So as that would currently stand, Councillor Loden would have to present the report and recommendations of the Audit Committee each time that it meets, so to each subsequent council meeting, and also each of the recommendations contained within that would need to be put and individually voted upon. So the provision is in there for councils that have committee structures. So some councils have, for example, a planning and development committee where a prescribed group of elected members will assess planning items and make recommendations. So there's a staff recommendation made to that committee, and then that committee then makes the recommendation to council, who ultimately makes the decision. Given that we don't have that structure and the Audit Committee is our only committee, are you of the view that we should either A, leave things as per the status quo, which is to have it in there but conveniently ignore it, B, delete that clause from our meeting provisions and as such a time that we had other committees within the City of Vincent add such a provision, or C, introduce a amendment to the clause such as at the discretion of the presiding member, or something of that nature, so that the committee may be called upon to provide that report and follow that procedure.
Through you, Mayor Cole, thank you, Councillor Toppelberg, for raising this. It did come to my attention late this afternoon, but unfortunately I didn't have a chance to get back to you on that. Look, council members, my view is that it's probably a little too late in the day for us to go revising existing clause 2.21. The far easier option will simply be that administration expressly complies with the provisions as they currently sit in the standing orders local law. Having said that, I think in an ideal world, I would actually recommend that clause 2.21 be deleted in its entirety, because you could just as effectively bundle up those requirements into a simplified form and add them to clause 2.20 immediately above, which requires the CEO to provide reports to council as required. And I think you could introduce a separate clause there that deals with decisions, minutes, recommendations, etc. of committees. The practice, from my recollection, for as long as I've been here, has been that audit committee reports or minutes that require some kind of consideration or decision of council have traditionally been reported to council in the form of a standalone report with the relevant minutes attached. But where there has not, or where there's only been recommendations of the Audit Committee to note certain things, then that hasn't been done, and they've always just been included in the information bulletin instead. So my view is that had we have identified this particular issue earlier in the proceedings, I think it would have given us some time to work through a solution and to advertise that revision to the local laws. As it wasn't done in this case, I would be reluctant to make too many changes to the local laws after, or that weren't captured in the advertised version. That's my recommendation.
Okay. You had me at delete. So I'm going to move the amendment on the orange, which deals with our long-standing discussion about deferral motions as procedural motions. So they'll get a second.
Can I have a seconder for the orange, Councillor Gonchevsky?
So I'm normally not one for superfluous words, and I do completely agree with the administration that it's not necessary and that it's effectively a note, but there is a... So basically what this says is that when it talks about clause 4, which deals with rules of debate, so it's a new 4.14, and what it says is, notwithstanding the provisions of Part 6, which is all of the procedural motions, where a member wishes to move that the motion be deferred, and that's how it's referred to in Part 6, which is why it's in inverted commas, it is considered appropriate that the member advise of this intent during debate, but allow other members to speak on the matter prior to moving the motion to defer. So what this effectively does is enshrine what has been general practice here. We've gone through and discussed at length at the workshop and in other discussions the impact on other procedural motions of trying to pull out deferral on its own, and what happens if someone then moves another procedural motion during it. So rather than mess with that, it's essentially a courtesy provision, if you like. And I guess whilst the administration says that it's not an enforceable clause, I guess that if it was to be used at a future point, if someone was to use that provision or a voting bloc was to try and to use that provision in a way that was deemed by other elected members to be contrary to the, I suppose, to the fairness principle. It would give something to point to, and perhaps there are, whether it be through code of conduct or otherwise, it could be something that could be addressed as not being in line with the agreed standing orders or the agreed meeting procedures. So it's not a big deal, but I think it's just important to note that that is the general accepted practice. It's not intended to lengthen debate, but to provide that opportunity for information that may be critical to the debate, or for people who've made the effort to come along to listen to the debate to hear it where it's proposed.
No comment from the seconder. Councillor Harley.
Thank you. Mayor, I don't agree with the amendment. That probably won't come as a surprise to anyone. I just don't understand why this particular procedural motion, out of all the ones that actually could be used to close down debate, completely close down debate, I don't understand why this particular one, to move a deferral motion, is the one that's been highlighted. The fact that it's been referred to as a courtesy amendment actually gives me more concern than I had originally when I read it, because I think what this does, it uses the word appropriate, which implies that a councillor who moves a deferral, intends to move a deferral motion, and who does not wish to give notice of that, where it's clear the debate, where the motion in front of council really needs to come back, and I'll give an example of a few times where that's happened previously, where it is clear that there is missing information, there's a lot more discussion to have, and where a councillor says, I move to defer, other councillors have the ability to vote down that deferral. And occasionally they have. So deferral motions do not automatically get up, but in fairness, I have seen most deferral motions are where everyone is kind of saying, yep, enough, we need to send this back, we need to have more discussion. My concern is that, seen as a courtesy motion, using the word appropriate may imply that a councillor who chooses not to exercise this courtesy clause is considered to be acting inappropriately, and I don't think that should be part of our standing orders. If this is about concern about a voting bloc, there's a couple of others I probably would have targeted, and that is I move the Speaker no longer be heard. That's a really good one. We've not used it here in the time I've been on council, but it's a really good one, and I've seen it used in many other forums. I move that the motion now be put. Again, we'll close down debate almost immediately. And the presiding officer is perfectly within their rights, and many councils do operate exactly like this. The mover speaks, the seconder speaks, the presiding officer calls for a speaker against, given the two previous speakers have spoken for, there being no speakers against. I move the motion be put. That's exactly how, I won't name councils, but there are many councils that run all of their standing orders exactly like that. So I don't believe there's any need for it. I note the administration's comments that it kind of doesn't consider the amendment to be necessary. They don't have any main objections. So my query is, why are we changing something where it really doesn't seem to have any particular impact for the sake of putting a courtesy clause in? And if councillors are concerned about people voting in voting blocks, then I think we should do some work on other areas of the standing orders that can be used and are used by, in not just councils, but these standing orders are relatively stock standard in many organisations, committees and things like that. So I think the deferral motion is a necessary procedural motion. There have been times where I've seen debates go round and round and round and round, and for the sake of everyone having a say around the room, we have continued to talk about a motion which is so clearly not going to get up. If this council is the forum for the people in the gallery, and with respect, the people now watching us online, if this is what we're here for, to meet their needs, to hear our views, then I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that. We're here to make good decisions, and that means we need all the information in front of us. And yes, that can come from other councillors, but we have a council brief, we have the ability to meet with officers, we have the ability to send emails around, but there are times when motions in front of us, in my time here, have been so badly in need of a deferral, if for no other reason than to save the embarrassment for us as a council. I'm not speaking about the current administration, but there have been times back in our history where deferral motions, I think everyone has breathed a massive sigh of relief, that we just move on and go, particularly when we used to meet till 11:30, quarter to 12 at night, I think was our latest meeting. So I'm not going to support this amendment, in case you haven't gathered that already.
Councillors, any comments? Well, look, I'll comment. I'm quite torn because I understand the intent here, and I understand what Councillor Toppelberg is trying to achieve with this note. But I also take Councillor Harley's point that the standing orders are really the rules of conduct around meeting procedures. So I get that. I also believe that this issue of deferral was something that seemed to be a bit of a problem when we had fortnightly council meetings. I think that our briefing process has gone a long way to deal with deferrals and really kind of alleviated that situation that did happen quite regularly, particularly on planning items with poor advice being received, etc. So I think we've come a long way in the time where I can really see where this was an issue. You know, like, I don't really have a problem with it being included. I don't have a problem with it not being included. I'm really fence-sitting on this, and I was hoping there'd be more debate because it's pretty innocuous, but I do take Councillor Harley's point that that why this motion and not the others that can equally be brought into force, and you know, is there sort of a mechanism to say whether that's appropriate or not appropriate? And we have not seen those motions being used in this council probably for many years. So, yeah, usually I'm pretty decisive on where
Can
I
I
sit
make a
with
point of
things,
clarification,
but,
considering that question has been asked twice?
what question?
Why this and not the other procedural motions within?
Oh yes, but I'll just finish. I'm just about to finish to say that it looks now that we are going to have some further debate, which I'd encourage. Thank you. Go ahead and ask a question.
Can make a point of clarification according to the standing orders, given that the question has been asked. So the reason this is the only provision of the procedural motions which can be resolved by further information, generally can be resolved by further information being provided, and as Councillor Harley rightly pointed out, when a person is so sure that that information is required and it's so patently clear to 5 people in the room, but one of the 4 others in the room perhaps has that information at hand, or one of the staff members has it, if that were afforded to them, then the need for deferral may not actually arise. So I'm happy to look at the wording in relation, in discussion with, and I know that I'm stepping outside of my point of clarification, so I'll ask you with your indulgence.
Yes, you are. So it should be a question.
I'll leave it as, I mean, rather than being prescriptive, which was to say that the members shall advise, the words considered appropriate were chosen, but the reason why this procedural motion is considered different to the other procedural motions is that it is usually resolvable by the provision of information, and that information may well be garnered by the continuation of debate.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
I think I waived my right to speak. Am I allowed to speak now, like previously? But if not, I have a question.
I have to be satisfied that you've indicated that you waive your right at the time and come back to talk to it, and I'm prepared to be flexible on this because you did wave your hand at the time.
So I'll ask it as a question anyway, because I don't necessarily have a fixed view on all of the provisions in relation to the procedural motions. But of the 2 that Councillor Harley referenced in relation to I put the motion now be put and that the speaker no longer be heard, that the act of someone subsequently speaking would defeat the actual, would actually be in complete conflict with the those 2 procedural motions referenced, whereas the deferral as Councillor Toppelberg has said, is that that no decision be made on that particular recommendation at the meeting. This is sort of how I take the intent. And I see that would be a difference in that someone's continuing to speak once a deferral had been flagged would not actually completely be in 100% conflict with the intention of the motion, whereas anyone speaking after a motion, that the motion be put, I see as being in complete conflict, but I would be grateful for other councillors' views or for advice on that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, forgive me if this does nothing but complicate the issue, but Part 7 of the local laws goes into some detail to explain the effect of each of the procedural motions. So, in summary, the effect of a deferral is simply to say, look, let's stop talking about this now and we'll bring this exact report back with any additional information that's been requested to a future meeting and we can restart the conversation afresh. If you look at the nearest procedural motion to that, which is that debate be adjourned or something to that effect, that's very different because that interrupts the flow of the current debate and resumes that same debate as though it was happening contemporaneously or immediately following the discussion. And so I think the distinct advantage of a deferral compared to an adjournment is that every council member gets to participate in the debate and the discussion on the item afresh, whereas an adjournment does not. If you've already spoken once through discussion of an item and it is then adjourned, then you lose the right to speak twice unless it complies with one of the criteria set out in the local laws when discussion or debate on that item is resumed at a later point, either at that same meeting or a subsequent meeting. As for the others, about that the member no longer be heard, that is effectively shutting down the council member and requesting that they stop speaking and that we just get on with other business. So through you, Mayor Cole, I just wasn't sure what the... so that one that I've just mentioned is that the member no longer be heard. The effect of that under clause 7.8 of the local laws is that it will cause the presiding member to not allow the member against whom the motion has been moved to speak to the current substantive motion or any amendment relating to it, except to exercise the right of reply if that person is the mover of the substantive motion. And sorry, through you, Mayor Cole, I wasn't sure what the other procedural motion was that Councillor Gronczewski mentioned.
I move that the motion be put is... I'm not moving that. Sorry, just to clarify. I'm just reminding you that's what it was.
Through you, Mayor Cole, thank you, apologies. Clause 7.4 of the local laws deals with the effect of a motion, that the motion be now put, and that is that it causes the presiding member to offer the right of reply and then immediately put the matter under consideration without further debate. So it basically shortcuts the debate, goes straight to the right of reply and then a vote.
Thank you for that clarification, CEO.
Okay, so we're debating the amendment. Would anyone who hasn't spoken like to make any comment or ask any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Just in response to Councillor Harley's, I guess, concern about the word appropriate, I'm wondering if the mover would be willing to adjust that wording to remove it's considered appropriate that the member advise to either that the member is encouraged to advise, which I realise it still makes it non-enforceable, but the intent is still there.
The CEO is also offering that you could delete the words "it is considered appropriate that" and simply say where a member wishes to move that the motion be deferred, the member should advise of this intent during debate and allow other members to speak on the matter prior to moving the motion to defer, but that's up to the mover and seconder.
Excuse me, point of order, Chair, that actually strengthens it significantly.
It could be seen that way.
Certainly could be.
I'm simply reading the CEO's suggestion.
Shortcut debate. I have no intention of changing the wording that's there, so whilst we're on this amendment, I'm happy with it as it is.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, I'm going to put it, and I still don't know which way to vote. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? I'm sorry, Councillor Harley. I think we'll move back to the substantive motion. Any further comment on the substantive? Yes, we do. The CEO has to raise a further amendment just to tidy up a loose end.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, apologies for the lateness in drawing this to your attention. It's actually only occurred to me while reviewing the amendment local law this evening. You'll note on page 324 of the agenda papers that administration has incorporated a proposal to amend clause 4.7 of the local laws to allow the presiding member to move a notice of motion. In reviewing that, I just had cause to look at current clause 4.12 bracket 3 of the current local laws, which currently says the presiding member is not permitted to move a motion, therefore does not have a right of reply. To ensure consistency and compatibility between the change that's proposed to clause 4.7 to allow the presiding member to move or second a notice of motion, I'm recommending that the following words be introduced to the commencement of clause 4.12 bracket 3, and that is, except as otherwise provided in clause 4.7. So Emma has just... No? Yes, Emma has just included on the screen what that would look like, and numerically it would be inserted as the new item 23 to bump the new item 23 that was just introduced by Councillor Toppelberg's proposed amendment, which is currently the substantive item 23, so everything else would get renumbered accordingly. But I just, as I said, apologies for the lateness of it, but it's really necessary in order to avoid any doubt whatsoever as to the rights or ability of the presiding member in terms of moving or seconding a notice of motion.
Does anyone wish to move the amendment? Councillor Gonchevsky, seconder. Councillor Loden. I think Councillor Hallett has a question, but do you wish to speak first, or...?
I just want to get my head across it at this point in time, so I'm happy to hear Councillor Hallett's question.
Okay, we'll go to the question first.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just wondering if it would be simpler to just put the word substantive in front of motion in 4.123.
Apologies. Through you, Mayor Cole, can I just ask Councillor Hallett to just clarify where he is suggesting the word substantive be introduced?
I'm hoping I'm looking at the same clause as you are, but under 4.12 right of reply, number 3, it's got the presiding member is not permitted to move a motion. Under 1, it refers specifically to the mover of a substantive motion, so could we not just replicate that in the third bit? Which might now be 4, given the amendment from Councillor Toppelberg.
Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies. So Councillor Toppelberg's amendment didn't alter clause 4.12 at all, and the only reason I would propose, or I've proposed the wording change to subclause 3 is not to alter any of the purpose or intent of what already is contained in clause 4.12, but rather to just provide, to reference the exception that is introduced by the change to 4.7, just so that there was no dispute or debate to say, look, refer to clause 4.7 where there is that exception provided.
Does anyone need some further explanation from the CEO on what is being... Well, perhaps...
Yes, it feels a bit double negative. No, I'm not following.
Okay, CEO, do you want to just talk it through again?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes. So, in essence, council members, if I could draw your attention to page 328 of the agenda papers, so that's the local law or the amendment local law. Item 22, towards the top of the page, amends clause 4.7 by inserting the following words. That's with the exception of a notice of motion under clause 2.2.5, which may be moved or seconded by the presiding member. So it introduces an ability at the outset of clause 4.7 for the presiding member to not move, or it disallows the presiding member from moving or seconding a normal motion or amendment, but allows the presiding member the ability to move or second a notice of motion. That being the case, the right of reply provision in clause 4.12.3 is at odds with what's proposed to be introduced here. So for the sake of consistency and to ensure there is no contradiction or conflict between different provisions of the local law, I'm suggesting that at the start of clause 4.12.3, which currently prohibits or reinforces the prohibition for the presiding member to move a motion and therefore does not have a right of reply, we simply say, except as otherwise provided in the clause I've just read, which is 4.7, that rule applies. So it's really just belt and braces, removes the contradiction that would otherwise exist if we didn't change clause 4.12.
Excuse me, through your chair. I'm really sorry, CEO, but that actually hasn't helped me enormously. Are you able to provide an example of that, like step us out in an example? And can I clarify? Under this, the Mayor would be able to move or second a notice of motion, and therefore, under that provision, would have a right of reply as a mover of a notice of motion, but is disallowed from moving or seconding a normal motion during the ordinary debate. I'm just checking my understanding in with you in case I'm a bit slow tonight. So under 4.12, what you're saying is that this currently reads in contradiction to the Mayor being able to move a notice of motion or second. So you're simply joining that to be read in conjunction with... Okay, I did get it, sorry.
You absolutely got it.
I should have explained it like that.
So where were we? Councillor Hallett has asked a question, Councillor Gondaszewski moved, and Councillor Loden seconded. Do you wish to speak to the item at this point, Councillor Gondaszewski?
No, all clear and in support.
Councillor Loden, any further comment on this amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments in relation to the standing orders? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Now we are moving to 11.8, which is the mid-year review of the annual budget, and this is an absolute majority decision. Can I have a mover for this item, please? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to support the mid-year budget review.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillor Fotakis.
Equally supportive.
Nice and brief. Anyone else wish to comment on the mid-year budget review? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. That takes us to item 13.2, Community Budget Submissions 2018-19. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Fully support the recommendation of administration on the community budget submissions. It's a great process that we go through here. But to keep things to the point, I'd like to move an amendment that at the same time as inviting community budget submissions, invite feedback from the community on what information the community would like to see and how they like information presented in Council's annual post-budget adoption newsletter accompanying the annual rates notice. If I could get a seconder.
Yep, seconder, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward. I'll feel really embarrassed if this is the only amendment tonight that doesn't get up. Basically, this is asking our community how they would like to see the budget presented to them, so we can provide a bit better clarity around how their rates are spent through the budget process, and hopefully we'd also be able to share that information in broader context, like through the website as well, so to increase the transparency.
Councillor Hallett.
Just a quick question, which I think I know the answer to, but just to confirm that I guess logistically that people would still be able to provide feedback on how they'd like budget information displayed, even if they weren't putting in a community budget submission. It would be a single submission point.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. It might not, in the back end of how the submissions are received, it wouldn't be a single collection point, but absolutely, the processes would just run concurrently so that if you choose to make a community budget submission or not, you still have the opportunity to provide a response to the matter that Councillor Loden's just raised.
Thank you. I support this amendment. I think the budgets are really, hopefully, clear description of the priorities for a council, and so that the better that we can communicate that to our community, the more meaningful it can be. So it would be good to get feedback on what is most relevant to locals around how we articulate or visualise the way that we spend our money.
Any further comments on the amendment? Look, I'd just like to lend some support to the amendment. I know that when the last budget newsletter was prepared, it was very text-heavy, and I think that diagrammatic representation of where your ratepayer dollars is going would be a very user-friendly and good graphic to include, or whatever else the community may wish to seek through this inviting of their feedback. So I look forward to hearing about what the community would like to see. Any further comments? I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments in relation to this item? I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. And that being the final report that we're considering this evening and having no further business, I would like to thank anyone who's joined us on the live stream, and the meeting is closing.